His theory of social justice, human rights, and the way he combined economics with philosophy has changed our approach to analyzing development and human welfare. In 1998, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics and continues to be an aspiration for many, as he still strives for an equitable and just world. I welcome Dr. Amartya Sen. Dr. Sen, thank you for taking out time to talk to Deutsche Welle. Let me congratulate you on winning the prestigious Peace Prize of the German book trade. As head of Deutsche Welle's Asia department and someone who also hails from Bengal like you, I'm truly happy that the award was bestowed on someone close to the region that I cover. Amartya, my first question is, when you look at the world today, do you feel that your notion economy is a moral science is still relevant and applicable? Because what we see at the moment seems to be quite remote from that.
Well, it is very relevant, I think, because the morality involved in human action, human choice, is a dominant feature of our relation with each other. And I don't think anything can take that away. You could ask the question, is it being effective? Do people think morally? And I think to some extent they do. So there's a bit of a lacuna there, but not entirely.
So my question to you is, in the present economic order, is it possible for the common people in South Asia, for example, to live a decent life? And do they have the opportunities to use their capabilities to the fullest?
I don't think they do have that opportunity. And it's also answer to the earlier question, I don't think it is easy for them to lead a kind of life they have reason to value. I think the way the economy and the society in South Asia has been run have been so defective that there are gaps in that. I mean, it's difficult to understand why India has been independent for more than 60 years. Why is it that even today basic health care is not available? Why is it that elementary schooling provided by the state is not that available? These are big issues that has been in the horizon of discussion, but not that of action, unfortunately. And these are defects that we have to deal with, and in some ways the previous governments neglected it, the present government neglected it even more.
Now, taking your capability approach, in which you collaborated with American philosopher Martha Nussbaum, has any German scholar, thinker, philosopher been an inspiration for you?
Well, yes, in all these moral thinking about society, you cannot escape the influence of Immanuel Kant, for example. I mean, he has been a big figure in people's mind. But there are a lot of different ways it's come, it's come from influences of political thinkers like Karl Marx. Similarly, it comes from the writings of poets like Heinrich Heine. It has also come from sometimes leaders of countries, political leaders. For example, Bismarck was one of the first in the world to talk about the duty of the state to make the lives of human beings decent, and that the state has a responsibility towards it. So there's a whole lot of German heritage behind it, certainly.
You often quote John Stuart Mill by saying democracy is ruling by discussion. Has India followed this principle, in your opinion?
No, absolutely not. We began with a more open democratic society after independence. Until independence, of course, people were imprisoned very easily if you were against the British imperial Raj. And many of my relations were in prison in what used to be called preventive detention. They hadn't done anything wrong, but they were kept in prison mainly because they were afraid, the government was afraid, that they would say things which the uh, British government wouldn't like. On the other hand, then when the independence came, that did go, and for a while we did have a fairly open democratic society. There were lapses, but still, by and large, that was the case. But recently it's got much, much worse. Now, if you say something negative of the government, the chances of your being harassed and sometimes imprisoned is quite high.
Amartya, you have witnessed the Bengal famine and have a huge expertise on poverty related studies. In countries like India or Bangladesh, economic growth actually has been quite impressive in the last few years. Yet, we see that economic growth has not been translated into poverty alleviation or um, poverty eradication. What are the reasons behind it?
Well, I think there are two things here. First of all, there have been some translations, certainly. The standard of living, both in Bangladesh and in India, in a kind of general way, is rather higher than it used to be. That one shouldn't deny. And yet, the use that can be made of the resources generated by economic growth have not been properly utilized to remove the deficiencies. And this again, basic education, basic healthcare are very important. Oddly enough, Bangladesh, which is poorer than India, has in many ways done more, done better than India has in that respect. And I think these are subjects on which huge amount of attention is needed, and it hasn't gotten that way. So, economic growth, as Adam Smith said, was a very good thing because it generates resources. But we have to use the resources both for the immediate benefit of individuals and also for allowing the government, the state, to do those things which only the states can do well, like providing education for all, school education for all, and similarly providing basic health care for all. And these have not been done. So you need economic growth, but you need also good utilization of the resources coming from economic growth.
You were talking about healthcare and education. Many people think, and which is part of democracy, which I would understand like that. But many people think that democracy could eventually lead to poverty eradication. Is it always the case?
Well, it depends on if the democracy is allowed to be practiced. That is, if there isn't enough school education, or if the schools are bad, or if the basic health care doesn't exist, and most of the education, health resources go for the relatively rich, then a democratic citizen has a reason to complain about it. If that complaint is allowed, and if that complaint is heard, and if the state changes its policies in response, then indeed democracy will make a big contribution to the eradication of these deficiencies. But this has not happened a lot. And right now, I have to say, we're going through a very unfortunate state where a very large number of uh, intellectuals who have tried to make their voice heard in pointing out what's going wrong with, say, in India, uh, have not been allowed to express that. Many of them have been imprisoned on one ground or another, and there's this odd thing, if you disagree with the government, often that is described as sedition. Now, sedition has got nothing to do with it, but that has become a common way of governing India over the last 5, 6 years.
Let's move from democracy now to justice. In your book, The Idea of Justice, you talk about, if I have understood rightly, about two approaches to justice: niti, legal concept, and nyaya, which is moral concept. How are these approaches playing out under Prime Minister Narendra Modi's rule in India, especially with regard to the Muslim minority?
Oh, not at all well, actually, unfortunately. You see, Naya is the vigor of the two concepts of justice. Niti is mainly who rules. There have been lapses in that too. But Naya is how ultimately it affects the lives of people. Now, if you look at minorities in India, they have really had a very tough time in recent years and been governed by a, a Hindu majority government doesn't make that much difference because, after all, the country has more Hindus than people of other religions. On the other hand, if that is used to suppress the views of the minorities, not allowing them to express their views, and in fact making it possible for them to be deprived of everything, including an old mosque, as happened recently in the Babri Masjid, in the Babri Mosque, and and many other things. Kashmir, which was a state on its own, was suddenly made into union territory. Now, there are huge problems to be dealt with in case of Kashmir because there is also a kind of interference coming from Pakistan, which is not very good in the context. But even bearing all this into account, just making it a union territory, removing the democratic freedom that people, when it was self-governed and which, when there were elections, had to remove them, has been a move in the wrong direction. And that has happened quite extensively recently. Similarly, questions have been raised now about while Hindus and Christians and others coming from elsewhere, if they claim to be treated badly abroad, they can easily get Indian citizenship, whereas this doesn't apply to Muslims in India. But Muslims in India are exactly as much Indian as Hindus in India. This is a that's been made again and again by Mahatma Gandhi, by Jawaharlal Nehru, by Rabindranath Tagore, and all the others. And I think this is very sad that that particular, well, it's a niti too. It's a bad niti, but it ultimately rebounds on the bad naya in the life that the minorities can lead in India today.
We were talking about all these great, amazing rishis and people, Mahatma Gandhi. Actually, do you think the secular Indian constitution is under threat at present?
To some extent, it is, yes, because the secular Indian constitution was very carefully built. People thought about it during the nationalist revolt in the 1930s and the 1940s. Then there was the Constituent Assembly, and led by Ambedkar, and we had a very secular constitution. But bit by bit, a lot of the uh, aspects of the constitutional secularism has been weakened. Now, the courts are meant to be the guardian of that, and to some extent serve that purpose. On the other hand, the courts themselves are quite divided, and the result is often the protection that secularism should have got from the court and from public opinion if it was allowed to be expressed freely hasn't happened. And I think I'm worried about the future of secularism in India.
The ruling Bharatiya Janata Party BJP claims that the Jammu and Kashmir region will progress leaps and bounds economically as a result of its inclusion in the mainstream political system. Well, it hasn't happened so far, whatever we are seeing. Do you think it's a possibility in the long run?
I do not. I think I'm not a great believer in people knowing economics because it's a boring subject. But I am in favor of people knowing some economics. And there are no economic reason whatsoever to have made that prognosis that because of what was done in Kashmir, that Kashmir is going to grow by leaps and bounds. There is absolutely no economic reasoning behind it. It's just the way the economy has been managed or mismanaged after inheriting a fairly buoyant economy from the predecessor. The economy has now been made into a highly problematic, um, uh, uh, put in a highly problematic state. That is generally true of India, even though there are some elements of success there. On the other hand, Kashmir, there's very little element of success. Most of it seems like failure. And there's nothing mysterious about it. And I say again, uh, I'm not advocating that everyone does economics, but knowing a little economics would have helped the government to understand that their prediction could not have been right. Of course, whether that would have prevented them from making the predictions, I don't know, because the predictions are often made for political reasons. But certainly, there would have been a reason to question what was being told the future of Kashmir would be like.
Right. Amartya, are BJP's divisive political actions, abrogation of Kashmir's special status or inauguration of the Ram temple, for instance, a hindrance to India's economic growth? I mean, what I want to know is how do political actions impact on economic performance?
Well, it is a hindrance, but that's not the main problem with it. The main problem with it is it's a hindrance to the liberty of individuals, particularly from the minority community. That's the main problem. Yes, it so happens it's also not very good for economic growth. Uh, you know, I'm not a great believer in capitalism, but I have to say capitalism has as its success by having a certain amount of even-handedness in the treatment of different groups. It has been one of its basic premises that you cannot be racist, you cannot be communalist based on religion, and uh, the success of capitalism has been based on that even-handedness. And when that's gone, I think along with other things becoming difficult, economic growth becomes difficult too.
Let's go to now what is happening in the world today. You know, coronavirus has hit India's economy also very, very hard, with the IMF predicting that it will shrink up to 4.5% this year. What needs to be done to deal with this? With the situation now, and how can the authorities minimize its impact on the masses?
Well, I think the coronavirus has been very badly managed in some countries, including the country I live in, namely the United States. So first of all, we need a better management of the coronavirus endemic, pandemic in this country. In India too, uh, India suddenly um, instituted the harshest of lockdowns that's known, but it was done without paying attention to the interests of the poor at all. Suddenly one day, in 4 hours' notice, everything was locked down. So those who didn't have a job couldn't get a job. People couldn't find resources for earning an income and buying food with it. And they didn't have hospitals to go to. And so I think it was not done in a way that would have help to eliminate these problems. You know, Europe, including Germany, has done much more successfully
Yeah, yeah, they're doing
than
much better.
than than America or India. Actually, unfortunately, America, Brazil, India fall among countries which have really done it pretty badly.
Amartya, the pandemic has also had a very negative impact on Bangladesh's textile industry and its workers. We see that countries at the end of the supply chain are more vulnerable to economic fallout than, of course, European countries. What needs to be done on a global level to ensure that developing countries and their workers don't have to bear this brunt?
Well, the solution has been the same as in Europe and East Asia, namely a lot of testing, a lot of contact tracing, and a lot of social distancing. And that's the only way of dealing with it. And the same could have been done in the textiles too, to Bangladesh, very often done. It was treated as if the problem would take care of itself by some kind of herd immunity or something else, and it hadn't come. So I think there have been things that should have been done in Bangladesh. There would have been things should have been done in India, and these should be looked into. And you know, it has not affected Vietnam or Thailand or South Korea
Yes.
in the same way at all.
We also see that China is increasing its economic influence on South Asian countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh. At the same time, India is increasingly drifting towards the US. So, in your mind, how will the US China economic rivalry impact the economic outlook of South Asia in coming years?
I think that's a very big problem because I think something has gone wrong in the relationship between USA and China. And there are faults on both sides, actually. I think the US has been particularly sharp in dealing with some of the Chinese trade privileges. And the Chinese have also, of course, tried to take advantage as much as they can. So I think we need a better relationship there. But this is not in India's hand. It is. It depends on what the Americans and the Chinese do. What the Indians can do is to play it more intelligently. And of course, I wouldn't say that uh, India's problems have been easy because the Chinese are at the moment quite powerful in the world and have made it known that they are not going to make compromises to suit the interests of India in this conflict. So I think of the questions you have asked me, this is the most difficult one to deal with. And this is where um, you refer to mill by government by discussion. Similarly, uh, uh, finding international solutions by discussion is also very important for the same reason that Mill talked about. And I think there is a strong case for India uh, to um, reciprocate any Chinese initiative that comes. But the Chinese are also in a quite aggressive mood now. We see it in Hong Kong. We see it in their attitude to Taiwan, and therefore it's not an easy problem. But that's the territory we have to be involved with.
Amartya, I understand the critique of conventional notion of socialism. I also understand your theory on multiple identities and the freedom to choose one identity over another. But in today's world, conservative identities are being used the most, like nationalist, religious, fundamentalist. Why? Is there any relevance of rethinking socialism within the boundaries of democracy and social justice? Because social democrats are not really doing well.
No, they're not. They're not. Uh, they're not doing as well as they could. Yeah, but there are a number of uh, countries in which socialists have been successful, not just New Zealand, but also some countries in Europe and so on. So it really depends a bit on how the leadership of the movement moves. Now, Europe is a place where the socialists and conservatives have, in some ways, alternated their influence, and that would continue to go on.
Professor Sen, your name Amartya was given by the great poet and thinker Rabindranath Tagore. So, talking to you, I feel really blessed and honored. Thank you.